Can musical instruments reveal human migration? At first, the idea seems almost fanciful. We usually think of migration through maps, languages, pottery, coins, weapons, buildings, bones, and written records. We imagine the movement of peoples being traced by archaeologists, historians, linguists, and geneticists. But what about a flute? What about a drum? What about a fiddle? What about the name of an instrument carried from one language into another? Could a musical instrument be a kind of historical witness? Could it preserve, in its wood or its skin, the memory of human movement? This is The Musical Archeologist, forgotten ideas from music's past. I'm Craig Dabelstein, and in this series, I'm taking ideas from old books on music, most of them completely forgotten, and bringing them back into conversation with the present. Today's idea comes from Ernest Closson's 1902 book, The Musical Instrument as an Ethnographic Document. That title is important. Closson does not call the musical instrument merely an artistic object. He does not call it simply a machine for producing sound. He calls it a document, and that word changes everything. A document is something we read. A document contains evidence. It may be fragmentary, biased, incomplete, damaged, difficult, or ambiguous, but it tells us something. It points beyond itself. For Closson, a musical instrument does exactly that. And Closson was not speaking as a casual observer. He was closely connected with one of the great centres of organological study in Europe, the Musical Instrument Museum of the Brussels Conservatoire. He worked in the orbit of the great Victor Charles Mahillon, whose extraordinary collections and catalogues helped lay the foundations of modern organology. In other words, when Closson looked at an instrument, he was not merely seeing an object, he was seeing evidence. It tells us something about the people who made it. It tells us what materials they had available. It tells us what sounds they valued. It tells us what ceremonies, dances, signals, or rituals required music. It tells us what technologies they possessed. And it tells us what neighbouring peoples they encountered. And sometimes it tells us where ideas have travelled. This is one of the most fascinating parts of Closson's book. He's not merely describing instruments, he's trying to follow their tracks. A musical instrument may look silent in a museum case, but to Closson it is full of movement. It may have crossed a desert. It may have travelled with soldiers. It may have passed along trade routes. It may have been carried by pilgrims, merchants, slaves, colonisers, missionaries, shepherds, sailors, or wandering musicians. It may have changed shape. It may have changed name. It may have entered a new culture and become, over time, almost unrecognisable. And yet some trace of its journey may remain. Closson is especially interested in the way names survive. The names of instruments sometimes show curious resemblances across great distances of time and space. He gives the example of the ancient word kanon, used by the Pythagoreans for a monochord in their acoustical experiments. He then compares this with the Turkish kanun, a kind of psaltery, and the Hindu kanun. He mentions the Hebrew drum called the toph, whose name and form reappear in the Arabic duf, the Turkish def, and the Spanish adufa. He notices that a Caucasian oboe called the zorna recalls the name of a similar instrument from northern China, the swana. Now, modern scholarship would be more cautious than Closson sometimes was. We would not want to claim too much from a resemblance of names alone. Similar words can mislead us. Similar instruments can arise independently. A tempting connection is not always a proven connection. But Closson's instinct remains valuable. He is asking us to listen to the historical echoes inside musical words. Sometimes an instrument's name is like a fossil. It preserves the trace of an older world. An even clearer case appears when names, forms, and historical circumstances all point in the same direction. Closson discusses the influence of Arab civilization upon European instruments. The Arabic oud becomes the lute, one of the most beloved instruments of medieval and Renaissance Europe. The Moorish quitar, introduced into Spain, becomes the guitar. The Arabic rebab gives rise to the rebec, one of the ancestors of the violin. The old Italian colacon reproduces the Oriental tambur. These are not just technical details in the history of instruments. They are evidence of contact between civilizations. They remind us that European music did not develop in isolation. Its instruments, like its ideas, were shaped by encounters. Trade mattered, war mattered, religion mattered, empire mattered, the Crusades mattered, the presence of Arab civilization in Spain mattered, the movement of scholars, theorists, craftsmen, and performers mattered. Every instrument carries within it a world larger than itself. Let's take the rebec. To a modern listener, it may seem like a quaint medieval fiddle, a step on the way to the violin. But Closson asks us to look further. Its relationship to the Arabic rebab suggests a story of cultural transmission. The instrument is not merely an ancestor of something European. It is also a survivor of contact between Europe and the East. That changes the way we imagine music history. Instead of a straight line from primitive beginnings to European perfection, we begin to see a web. Ideas, objects, names, and techniques all move, and music moves with them. Closson also points to a particularly curious zone of resemblance: Egypt, Arabia, Persia, the Caucasus, and the Balkan countries. There he finds similarities in both instruments and names. The Egyptian nai takes its name from a Persian word meaning reed. The same name is used in Romania for the panpipes. A Caucasian fiddle called the kamancha bears a Persian name. The bowed instrument called the kamanche is common to both Arabs and Persians. Musical bands known in the Caucasus as sazandar and zorna operate under the same names in Persia. Closson connects these similarities with political and cultural history. The long domination of the Caliphate in Persia, later conflicts between Persians and Turks, and the movement of Persian musicians to Constantinople. Whether every detail would be accepted today is not the main point for us here. The important thing is the method. Closson is reading instruments historically. He's treating them as clues. And this is where the musical instrument becomes more than an object. It becomes a witness to contact, a witness to borrowing, a witness to imitation, a witness to conquest, a witness to admiration, a witness to the strange fact that the conquered sometimes conquer the imagination of the conqueror. That last point is especially beautiful. Closson notes that the Turks, though often victorious over the Persians, nevertheless came under Persian intellectual influence in music. In other words, political power and cultural power do not always move in the same direction. An army may win a battle, but a melody, a theory, a tuning system, or an instrument may win the future. This is one of the reasons music history is so rich. It does not simply follow the history of kings and wars. It follows fascination. People borrow what moves them. They copy what astonishes them. They adapt what proves useful. And they transform what becomes their own. And over time, the borrowed object no longer feels borrowed. The guitar becomes Spanish. The lute becomes European. The rebec becomes medieval. The drum becomes local. The pipe becomes traditional. But beneath these later identities lie older journeys. This is why the study of instruments can be so revealing. We often speak as though traditions are pure: Scottish bagpipes, Spanish guitar, European violin, Arabic lute, Japanese shamisen, Indian tanpura. But traditions are rarely pure in that simple sense. They are layered. They are inherited, borrowed, adapted, misunderstood, refined, localised, and loved into new forms. A tradition is not weakened by this, it is made richer. The fact that an instrument has travelled does not make it less meaningful to the people who claim it. Quite the opposite, the journey becomes part of its meaning. This is one of the forgotten ideas from music's past that I think we badly need. Musical instruments are not just things. They are repositories of human contact. They remind us that music has always been more global than we imagine. Not global in the modern commercial sense, but global in the human sense. People move and they carry sound with them. They arrive somewhere new and the sound changes. They meet another people and the sound changes again. And sometimes, centuries later, We look at an instrument and think we are seeing something fixed, ancient, and purely local. But if we read it closely, we may discover movement. A musical instrument can be a map, not always a precise map, not a map with borders and dates and perfect certainty, but a map of contact, a map of memory, a map of human curiosity. That is Closson's great insight. The instrument in the museum case is not dead. It is waiting to be read. And if we learn how to read it, it may tell us not only what people played, but where they had been, whom they had met, and what sounds they could not bear to leave behind. You've been listening to The Musical Archeologist, Forgotten Ideas from Music's Past. Written and presented by me, Craig Dabelstein. The music for this podcast was composed by Jeffrey Young. The Musical Archeologist is one of many projects from Maxime's Music, dedicated to recovering forgotten music, forgotten writings, and forgotten musical worlds. Thank you for listening.